CPC meeting. The Seattle Police Commission acknowledges that we are on the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Muckleshoot, Suquamish, and Duwamish people, past and present. With humility, we recognize how much we benefit from living on their land and water. The Seattle Community Police Commission honors and lifts up these tribes, and we hope that this acknowledgement will encourage authentic relationships with urban Native people and all Coast Salish tribes. We'll turn the meeting over to Commissioner Fields.
Good morning, everybody. Move to attendance. Project Avi?
She's excused, I believe.
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Got it. Reverend Hunter.
Present.
Good morning, Reverend
Morning.
Walden.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Good morning, Reverend Walden. Douglas Wagner.
Present.
Good morning, and Joseph Saya. I know you're here. I just heard.
Present.
Perfect. And Alina Santillan. No, Alina.
Present.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Erica Newman.
Erica's here. It looks like we need to promote them to a panelist.
Got it. Tasha Johnson.
Good morning. Present.
Morning. Legea Washington. Suzette Dickerson. I see the name.
That is here, she's on the line.
Yeah, okay. And then Officer Mark Mullins.
Officer Mark Mullins is present.
Good morning, Officer Mullins. All right, so we need to review and approve the minutes from our April 6th meeting and the agenda for this meeting. So does somebody have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the agenda is, I'm sorry, the minutes are approved. Now we need to approve the agenda. Does anyone have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you, Reverend Hunter. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. So we will, we have no action items to review, so we will move to the debrief for our community engagement meeting, including the monitor's core assessments. So our goal is to help bring commissioners and the rest of the public up to speed on the meetings we conducted, the public engagement meetings with the monitor. So the monitor has been conducting a series of assessments for SPD performance across a range of issues, specifically use of force, stops and detentions, internal investigations, crisis intervention, training and supervision. And so we, as the Community Police Commission, convened a series of community engagement sessions to host the monitor as the monitoring team completed specific portions of those assessments. So we've hosted 4 so far. Each one was dedicated to an assessment of a specific area, crisis intervention, stops and detentions, and use of force, which went across 2 different sessions. And as we did so, we solicited questions from the public, some of which were asked during the sessions and some of which are still outstanding. What we need to do, I think, moving forward, and what the CPC has discussed doing is creating a separate, an additional community engagement meeting where some of these questions can be engaged with in more detail. But I'll run through some of the outstanding public questions just to give the Commission and the public a little bit of an idea of what community is asking. So the questions raised from the crisis intervention assessment first we were provided by SPD with SPD's definition of a crisis, which is an episode of mental and or emotional distress that creates significant or repeated disturbance and is considered disruptive by the community, friends, family, or the person themselves, which was helpful for me. I didn't realize that was the definition. It seems a bit overbroad to me personally, but some of the questions that the public had for this assessment was centered on the missing crisis data that I know Mr. Maxey from SPD recently wrote us a letter about. There's a sense among community members that some people who were in crisis are not included in SPD's data about crisis response, and there's concern about the possibility that the community definition of crisis may diverge from what the monitor and SPD are using. And I know we have Mr. Maxey here to talk about that in a moment. For stops and detentions, that meeting was held on February 8th, and the assessment included a statistical analysis of SPD stops overall, broken out by demographics, and included a review of SPD stop practices and stops and frisks. There was a great deal of public questions about the fact that the data did still indicate racial disparities in terms of who was stopped and frisked and questioned. The monitor did note that that this merited further assessment, and so a lot of the public wanted to know what that meant and what could be done to reduce bias, and whether bias explained the disproportionate number of stops and detentions for people of color and Black people specifically. Then we have the meetings that were held on March 8th and April 12th about use of force. The report discussed SPD's use of force review and investigation systems and statistics on misconduct allegations, as well as use of force in general. The questions focused on, again, potential racial biases in the amount of force that was used, noting that officers were much more likely to use force against people of color and in specific geographic areas. And the public was concerned about why that was being done, and also, again, asking what the monitor was going to do to further analyze and potentially reduce those disparities. And so the goal of the CPC with this process was to provide a platform for community members to hear directly from the monitor in a transparent way. Many questions were raised, including the questions I briefly touched on, which we will get into in more detail. We, as the Community Police Commission, note that there are still a number of questions that need answers. We've collected some of those questions, we've provided feedback to the monitor, and we feel that a special meeting that would allow community members to continue to ask these questions and to get answers directly from the monitor would be the best way to move forward. Director Grant, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Austin, that was perfect. The only thing that I would add would be that I would also like to open up, if we were to engage in having a special meeting, which I highly recommend, is that we not only invite the monitor, but we also invite SPD to be able to respond to the questions that were asked. We collected many questions over the last 4 sessions. And so we want to be able to give folks the opportunity to be able to hear directly from both of those entities.
Sure, absolutely. Did any of the co-chairs or any other commissioner have anything they'd like to add? Reverend Walden, I think I might have just heard you.
It was me. I was just going to say, Director Grant, it's hard to, you're just a little quiet on my end. I don't know if that's the case for other people. I was having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little.
The main thing that I was adding is I want to make sure that SPD is also included in that invitation if we are to conduct a special meeting. And I highly recommend that we do, because when we went into this agreement to host these sessions with the monitor, one of the things that we really pushed for was that there was going to be an opportunity to have the loop closed at the end of the final assessment and the report out to the courts. And so we didn't want to just host meetings talking at folks. We wanted to be able to have a dialogue, and we wanted to be able to respond, be able to put forth an opportunity for them to have, for community members to have their questions and concerns responded to. So I just want to make sure that it's not just the monitor, because there are certain elements of those questions that it would make more sense for SPD to also have an opportunity to be able to answer and provide their feedback.
Thank you. Did any commissioners have anything else they'd like to add about this process? Okay. And so returning to the agenda in a moment. So we, as the CPC, have submitted letters to SPD asking in particular about SPD data collection and data validity. And we've asked Mr. Maxey from SPD to discuss these data inquiries. Mr. Maxey, thank you for joining us today.
Morning.
Good morning. Sorry about that. Does Director Grant, if you had something that you wanted to lead off with, or if any of the commissioners have specific questions that they would like to ask? Okay, I did have one. Thank you for your letter. We appreciate you responding so quickly and comprehensively. I'm curious, when I read your letter, one of the major takeaways for me was obviously that deciding whether somebody's in a mental health crisis is very complicated. And SPD acknowledged that, and acknowledged that people can differ, including trained professionals can differ about, when it comes to deciding whether somebody's actually in a mental health crisis or whether their behavior could be explained for some other reason. And I'm curious what you would think and what SPD more broadly would think about the problems with expecting officers who, of course, don't have, significant professional mental health training to be put in a position where they have to be the ones to decide if somebody is in crisis or not. And so I'm curious, Mr. Maxey, what you would think about the issues with that and potentially how to mitigate those issues.
Well, you're absolutely right. It is a very complex issue to sort out. And it actually is significantly different in cases that involve just responding to somebody in crisis, when we look at force against people who are in crisis, and in particular, when we look at fatalities with people in crisis, because the designation by officers is serving several different purposes for the department. First of all, it's not just the officer that's making that determination. When the 911 call comes in, the dispatcher is already making a predetermination. Is this likely a crisis event? And dispatchers have been trained in this. If they believe it is, they are looking for CIT resources or the crisis response unit if available. So they're already beginning to think what resources we can get there, whether this is the co-response model with a mental health provider, whether it's the crisis response unit, or whether it is a CIT certified officer. If you recall, we have 2 levels of CIT training. Every officer through in the basic law enforcement academy goes through crisis intervention training at a basic level. I believe they're getting 8 hours at this point. When they come to the department, there is the option to become what we call CIT certified, which is a 40-hour program also offered by the Criminal Justice Training Commission to further educate officers in crisis intervention. In our own in-service training, we weave that in, both in use of force, in contacts, in de-escalation. So those concepts of what a person might be experiencing when an officer is encountering them is hard baked into our policy and our training. So I think the premise that officers are not prepared to identify this may be misplaced. I think they actually have quite a bit of training to identify when a person's in crisis, and they do have the backstop of the dispatcher initially, as well as if a mental health provider is available, there could be a co-response to the identified crisis event. Once they get there, I mean, we have the definition in policy, but functionally what crisis is when an officer engages with them is, are they so emotionally overwhelmed that they cannot engage with the officer? Are they completely, are they so emotionally overwhelmed that they are not functional? They can't respond, they can't build rapport, and or is there an ongoing likelihood that they are going to cause harm to themselves or others? And as officers identify that, the point of that is to refer within the department to the crisis response unit that does follow up with people that have been identified in crisis to see if we can get information about what their behaviors are, what their resources are, and we can actually craft what we call a crisis card in the management system, that if we encounter that person again, we have information already available to the officer about what the best approach is. So that's functionally the purpose of identifying someone in crisis, is so that when we next encounter them, we have the necessary information to do so in a more sophisticated manner. If force is used, and especially if force is used and there is a fatality, we no longer have that interest and need for the next contact because there will not be such a contact. That has, in our processes, put the identification of crisis in those high-level cases on a slightly different path, because it's not completed by the officer at that point. And we did identify, as we went through our data, that there was a slight delay in this. It's caught by the force review unit, it is caught by the force review board, but ultimately it's up to the chain of command of that officer to backfill the data point on crisis for someone who is no longer alive. We did, and this is what I wrote in the letter, is that we went through and we validated all of those crisis points. There were, I think, 9 cases that were repeatedly identified as of concern in this forum. And we identified that we have properly, according to our definitions of crisis, identified those people as having been in crisis before the type 3 use of force was used against them, and that that is in our public data, and it is correct, and we have validated that. That was probably a little bit more than you asked, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Reverend Walden. I see your hand.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. My question, you might have already kind of hit on it, is that in the data, how many contacts do you have with repeat people who are constantly, not constantly, but maybe often in crisis, and where they live at or where they're at, then the 911 call get called, and and the units go out to those people more than once, and take them sometimes to Harborview or to other places. So do you have any stats on that?
Reverend Walden, it's a great question. I don't have the stats on the number of people in crisis that we frequently encounter. I do know that we have a discrete group of people that are either constantly in crisis or have repeated contacts with police. And to your question, yes, we do work very hard through the crisis response unit to continually outreach to those people, to make sure that they are in treatment, and to try to manage those individuals outside of a 911 response. It's much better if we can get them into services, we can keep them maintained in services so that it's not a police interaction, because every time we have that emergent interaction, we're doing our best to ensure that those officers are prepared for that interaction. We also have I'm trying to click on it here. We have a online high utilizers dashboard that we use, and I'm not 100% sure that it is publicly facing, but let me just double check that. Yeah, so internally we have a dashboard on that where we maintain the high utilized. It is not publicly facing, and I can get you the information from that shortly, but not at this point.
Thank you. I mean, as someone, I just have one more comment. As someone that was initially involved with bringing CIT to Seattle from Portland back in the late in the 1997, after the death of Beauregard Mitchell. I've always asked all the questions about it because I know that there was our work and other people's work to bring it here, and the DOJ memorialized it and part of the consent decree. And I know that there's a lot of complaints about it, but I know over time that I've gotten many calls from police officers who told me that how they did go into the house, they were able to take guns out, especially people who have dementia. I mean, and that's not on the table. We're not talking about that, but it's been several calls that's gone out where the family members thought they had all the guns out the house, and the family member was having an episode, and they had to call somebody to come and be able to get the guns out of the house. And so there are many calls that absolutely end okay, and the ones that end badly, they end badly. But it's no recognition for the ones that end okay. I've gotten too many calls over the last years from family members thinking that we have this for people who are in crisis. And a lot of times elderly people, they take too much money. I got to be one of these elderly people now, so what can I say? But sometimes they take too much medicine, not enough medicine, and they can be having an episode. And in those cases, that was the reason why we initiated it, because Beauregard Mitchell was having an episode. He was 84 years old and he got killed. And that's the reason why we initiated this program, to be able to make sure that people who are having episodes can get humane treatment and be able to get to the hospital. And that has happened over time. I know that there's a lot of discussion about the ones that go badly. They absolutely go badly. But the ones that go correctly, and the family members are happy that they were able to get some relief. Thank you.
And Reverend Walden, thank you for that. It is, certainly your work to bring the crisis intervention work to Seattle, is certainly built into everything that we've done to date. But, we address this on many different levels. We use the Memphis model, whereby 60% of our officers are crisis intervention trained up to that 40-hour certification. We have the co-responder model, where the mental health provider and officers go out when available, and the availability of that resource has been an issue over time. And then we do have that designated crisis response unit, which does all that follow-up and background work to help stabilize individuals and families. One of the main difficulties we have in this is there simply are not enough resources. I know there may be an assumption that there's always a place where these people can get help. That's not always the case. And this is the frustration that we have, is that we continually engage with the high utilizers and we don't always have a way of stabilizing them, and that can be problematic.
Thank you.
Alina, I saw I'm sorry, Reverend Walden, did you have something else you want?
No, I was just saying thank you, because I know for a fact that it's a revolving door at Harborview, because we've been part of sending people there. I mean, the lady who got tased, the naked lady who got tased, she was put out on the streets right away. And then she got picked up again, and they sent her to housing in a residential program, and she came out with no housing. And so until we talk about housing and all the other parts that goes along with this, we're going to be continually in this situation. And it has to be a holistic approach. And so thank you. I won't take up no more time, because I'm passionate about this. Some things I'm real passionate about, and others, I just kind of work on it. But I really am about this. And sometimes people have misunderstandings or or because the ones that absolutely goes badly, that they don't ever think about the ones that worked correctly and the family members who are absolutely glad that it did work. And then we have sorrow for the ones that didn't work out correctly and the individual lost their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Walden. I see Alina and then Director Grant and then Douglas.
Dr. Grant, you can go first.
No, Alina, that's okay. I'm still formulating my question because I've added something else on there. It's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I had two questions. One, how many police officers are paired with a social worker who has more experience and knowledge in addressing folks who are having a mental health crisis, or maybe there's a substance abuse issue there? I also want to acknowledge that that might be an interesting power dynamic between the officer and the social worker. And I'm curious what kind of relationship building opportunities they have. Is it always a different social worker paired with a different officer? Is it the same? I can imagine, situations being like, no, this is what we need to do. No, I think we need to do this. So curious about what that looks like. And then just a follow-up is, what's the difference between CIT and the crisis response unit? Do those questions make sense? I kind of rambled that first.
Absolutely, they do, and I'll do my best with them. Starting with that last question. So CIT is the 40-hour training that's done by the Criminal Justice Training Commission and supplement annually with updated training within the department. For example, we've done discrete modules on alcohol and substance abuse manifestations in crisis. We've done specific modules on autism, and every year we try to increase the knowledge base about what might be driving the crisis, and sort of the why behind it and what officers should be looking to see. That being said, we do not focus on officers having diagnostic tools. It does not matter what the underlying condition is. It matters that the behavior is explained by something other than the resistance of the subject, the intentional resistance. And that's what we train towards. So that's the CIT. Crisis response unit is more of a follow-up unit that it can do direct interventions, but really what they do is they review all of the crisis contacts. They look for patterns. They do outreach to those individuals that have been fighting crisis, and they work with them to get resources and stabilize. They also help with our training. They also interact with our crisis intervention committee, which is a group that incorporates academics and professionals and treatment providers to help guide our policy and our mobilization into the field. To Reverend Walden's question earlier, I've just gotten some data. We have, over the last 3 years, we have 206 people that have more than 10 police contacts. We have 44 that have 20 or more. We have 50 or more. And we only have one person that has been contacted 100 times by the Seattle Police Department in the last 3 years. But it starts to show the volume of contacts that some individuals can have with the police department. Those are the high utilizers that the crisis response unit would be reaching out to see how they can better help them other than a 911 police response. As far as the relationship between the officers and the mental health providers, typically the way that should work, and I hesitate because I would really love to get some of those people here before this committee to talk about those relationships. But ideally what's happening is when the officer and the mental health provider are called out, and I will tell you, I think last time I checked, we had 2 contract mental health providers. This is not a large program. It is something we would very much like to increase. And my number may be incorrect on that, but that's what I recall at this point. So you have a contract mental health provider. They go out with an officer when available and to an identified crisis call. What should be happening out in the field is that the mental health provider should be taking the lead on the contact unless there is some identified risk. If the risk is identified, then that can switch and the officer would be taking the lead. But that team has to, over time, develop some sophistication about what that give and take is and communicate. And we don't, we certainly attempt to pair mental health providers with officers that are receptive to that co-response model and will work with it. If it's not working, we would swap out the officer. I think we have pretty good teams and we have pretty good working relationships in the field.
Thank you, Alina. Did you have any follow-up questions on that?
I don't think so. I think it would be interesting eventually of just like examining the police budget and seeing what is the cost of this program, how can we expand it, and where can we pull resources from, rather than just adding more money to SPD's budget. What are areas that we can just redirect resources? Because it seems like this is a really important. I think that it's a really important program if we're able to pair officers with folks that have that have those skills, until we can really, kind of to Reverend Walden's point, beef up a lot of other systemic issues, housing, access to healthcare. Like, it is a revolving door at Harbor Reel. Like, they don't stay there. So yeah, just be curious to like further engage in that. That's not a question, Mr. Maxey, just a curious thought of, it'd be interesting to kind of engage in that conversation. Thank you.
And we're all for that. Ultimately, there's a question about whether this should be a wholly police directed program or how that can actually be more of a community partnership. So, we are actively working with the mayor's office right now, exploring methods of alternative response, and we'll see where that lands. It all depends on how the systems can be deployed, who's willing to do the work, who's available, and how comprehensive we can make it. But we're all for that.
Thank you. Director Grant, did you formulate your question yet? And then I see Douglas, Tasha, and then I see your hand as well, Officer Mullin.
Okay,
Thank
I'll be
you.
real quick. It sounds like Brian actually already answered a little bit of what one of my questions were. It was basically wanting to know if SPD is already kind of assessed and determined what type of resources would be more helpful to you all when you are having to go out on these crisis response calls. I know Alina made a good point about, being able to kind of redirect funding, but I would really love to hear specifically from SPD, what could be done. What do you all feel like within your camp could be done? What would be a resource to you to be able to have better responses to some of the crisis calls that have not ended well, right? I do know that there are crisis calls that have been fine, but for the ones that have not, that's one of my questions. And then the other thing was, I'm really curious, and this has come up quite a bit, about the data from the officer encounter from the very beginning through the end to the report out. I'm wondering how that data is being put together and what process, like what flow is it going through when it gets to the report stage? And then my final question would be, have you all done any type of level of assessment and review to determine what best practices, what you could do to improve best practices based on the different disparities that have been identified?
Well, there's a lot there, Director Grant, and that could take up the rest of this meeting, I
I
think.
know, I'm sorry. You can always get back to me, but that's been weighing heavy on my heart and mind. Those are just, about 3 questions that I would like to be able, to, I'm sure other people are thinking about it too, just giving folks the opportunity to hear the response.
Could you actually repeat your second question? I think I got your first and third.
Yeah, so basically, from SPD's system and you all's process, from the first encounter, right? Well, for a crisis call, first encounter with a police officer through the end of that entire situation, how is that information, how's that encounter being processed? How is it being triaged? And then how is it being reported out? So that when we eventually get like that, again, final assessment or report out, I just would like to know what all happens, what all that data is being ran through by the time that we get it.
All right, so we have many different reporting systems. And we call these source systems. So when an officer goes out and contacts somebody, let's say there's a Terry stop, that would be reported in Mark 43, our records management system, by the officer, explaining the reason for the contact, what happened, if a search was conducted, if so, what the basis for that search was, and what were the results of that search. If it morphs into an arrest, or if you start out with probable cause, that too is recorded in Mark 43, the records management system. I guess even taking a step back before that, if an officer is dispatched, you have the computer-aided dispatch system, which is currently Versaterm, which captures certain information about what the reporting party said, who was dispatched, any communications that happen along with that. Some of that information flows into Mark 43 that sets the stage for the officer reporting. If this person is a person in crisis, the officer would complete a crisis card identifying that in Mark 43. That's an attachment to the primary report. If there is a use of force, the officer would enter a use of force report in what's called IA Pro or Blue Team. That is a separate system that houses use of force information. The initial report in the records management system goes to a supervisor for approval, and then up through the chain of command for review as necessary. The use of force report, depending on whether it's a type 1, type 2, type 3, is routed slightly differently. But once it's entered, it is reviewed by a supervisor, and then depending on whether it's type 1 or type 2, it's going up through the bureau chief for final approval, being reviewed by the lieutenant, the captain, and then the bureau chief if it is a type 2. If it's a type 1, I think it only goes to the captain level. Type 3s, we have a force investigation team that comes out to investigate. So the officer is not doing direct data entry, in fact, prohibited from doing so. They are being interviewed using a cognitive interviewing process before they have watched any video, before they have any information, to really understand what they perceived and why they did what they did. Our policy is very careful to recognize that an officer's perception is likely to differ from the video evidence. We expect it to. The most concerning thing is when you have a whole bunch of officers that have not talked to each other. If a whole bunch of officers are reporting exactly the same thing, it raises concerns about whether they have talked to each other. We separate them out. We do not allow that to happen, and we preserve the integrity of those interviews. During that interview, the fit detectives may introduce video or other evidence to test the memory and see whether it's consistent with what we can see with the objective evidence. But again, our policy recognizes that a fisheye lens on an officer's chest is not where they're looking. It's not necessarily what they perceive. Whole lot of stuff there. All of that. So then the fit investigations are routed through the Force Review Board for review, and that then gets entered into IA Pro if there are any recommendations that come out of that review process. If there's any misconduct that is suspected, it gets routed to OPA by any of those mechanisms that I just described. But in terms of the data gathering piece, it's primarily out of Mark 43 and out of IA Pro based on what the officer entered. That information is then digested into the data analytics platform and connected with a whole host of other systems, including our human resources information, complaints coming out of OPA, lawsuits, all sorts of information is all brought together in the data analytics platform for more granular analysis. So I think that hopefully responds to your question number 2. In terms of number 3, where I think you're bringing up the concerns that the monitor has raised about disparities, and I know it can be very frustrating when we talk about different words, and I know Reverend Walden has been very clear to say, you can talk about disproportionality and you can talk about disparity, but this is racism. And she said that several times in this platform, and I fully respect what she's saying, because I think ultimately all of the officer activity, in fact, any human activity, is taking place in the context of 2022 in the United States, with a long history of, I don't need to go into it, but oppression of BIPOC communities. And that's the world we live in. And when you look at education, when you look at healthcare, you look at any sort of government or quasi-governmental interaction with human beings, you look at tax records, you look at income disparities, there is a huge disproportionality and disparity in all of those systems. What we try to figure out is, in policing activities, what are we bringing to the table? Are we exacerbating, the disparities that we inherit from upstream? Are we reducing those ideally? Are we maintaining them across the board? But what effect are we having? And that's what we try to get at. And a lot of the analysis that's been done by the monitor, by others in the city, by CPE, where you take officer activity, you throw it over census population, and you declare a disproportionality between the people we are interacting with and the representation in the census data. It's fundamentally a really unhelpful analysis, because it doesn't tell you anything. And what I mean by that is trying to manage a police department, trying to make decisions in policy and training. If you tell me there is a disproportionality, for example, in our stops, but then you read all of our stops and you say, well, gee, 99% of those are supported by reasonable suspicion. Are we missing a portion of the population that we should have identified? Are we simply reacting to the individuals that we are encountering based on 911 calls and observed activity? Or is there some actual bias that is driving officer decision-making such that they seek out disproportionate numbers of people of color? And simply throwing officer activity over census demographics really tells you nothing. And to be very clear, there was no finding of bias in any of the monitoring reports. He doesn't say that because he can't. He has no information about the why behind the disproportionality he identifies. And we've been frustrated by this for a long time. We've done it in our own reports. We see disproportionality, but then the question is, what do we do about it? We're already doing all of the training we can. We're already doing the holding people accountable. We have, if someone in the field identifies a bias incident, we are sending out a supervisor. We are routing cases as identified to OPA for further analysis. The question is, what can we do to change these outcomes? And do these outcomes need to be changed, or are we interacting with the people that are presenting to us? And what we've done is we've taken a hard look at this. We've looked at our data analytics platform. We go, look, we have this rich trove of data that we can dive into. And so and I think I've talked briefly about this here, but with our EAQ, our equity, accountability, and quality program, we're trying to take the next step in data analysis and do this responsibly. And importantly, in the equity portion of this analysis, what we've done, and so we've only targeted it at decisions to frisk. That's the first step. We will expand this out into all activity as we can. But what we did is, okay, here are all the variables that we've gathered in all of these data systems in order to identify what's driving a decision to frisk. And controlling, and I think there's more than 100 variables we take into account, we identify the percentage of cases where we cannot identify any other variable that would have driven that decision other than race. Now what we have is a targeted percentage of cases that we can look at. And you know, there are many things we cannot control for. So we're assuming all things are equal here. They're not, but this is the best we can do based on our data. And what we see is not what gets reported out in a lot of these annual reports, which is if you take a look at, you know, stops over a year period, and you look at, you know, the percentage of Black people stopped and the percentage of white people stopped, and you start looking at that, you know, you will see a certain level of disparity. But what you don't get are the nuances. And when you look at this by sector, by beat, over time in different locations, you start seeing this up and down, where the data is not consistent. It's not the fact that people of color are frisked more often than white people all the time. It depends on the location, it depends on the time, and what we see is that inverts depending on a lot of the variables. And once we can see the patterns and we can identify what we cannot explain except by race, the next step is to take that information and present it out to the commanders and say, here's what we have. In this percentage of cases, in these locations, we cannot explain why this decision was made except by race. Therefore, we put it out to you. What explains this? And, you know, we've been playing with the data. We've looked at guns recovered. We've looked at frisks and whether weapons were found as a result of that. We're looking at crime trends and patterns. You know, it may be that a certain population is increasing criminal activity in a location that might explain the disparity. But what we're trying to do is push this back on commanders to get them to think about this, to become invested in this, because this is finally something that we can point to and say, this is what you need to address and explain, as opposed to these, you know, overarching theoretical impacts when you throw stuff over population. This is all peer reviewed. This is all, we've got quality control on this. And I think I said previously, we will be putting our methodology out publicly, the source code of this analysis, to allow people to respond to us and say, hey, we don't think you have this right. So we're being transparent with that. This is, to my knowledge, the most sophisticated attempt to identify what are the impacts of the policing activity itself amidst what we fully recognized is an inequitable system. Hopefully that helps. I realize that was a lot of words, and I'm happy to take follow-ups on that.
Thank you very
Director
much.
Grant.
I was just gonna say thank you for your responses, and I can follow up at a later date.
Thank you, Director Grant. I believe next it was Douglas, was it you next? And then Tasha? Okay, yes. And then I have not forgotten about you, Officer Mullins, and then Reverend Walden. I also see your hand.
Great. Brian, thanks for being here and thanks for consistently showing up to these meetings and having these discussions with us. So I just want to say that at the outset, that's appreciated. So at our most recent community engagement meeting, there were a variety of questions around SPD data validity, and community members kind of had concerns and some suspicions around the data that SPD shares with the federal monitor, which then informs these assessments. And I know one of your most recent responses to concerns data validity, but I wanted to bring this up because since that community engagement meeting, we've been hearing that there are some issues, data malfunction involved in SPD's data that affects data related to race, and thereby then affects all of the kind of underlying data that goes to these federal monitoring reports. And I wonder if you can just kind of help educate everyone here, bring us all up to speed on kind of what you're aware of that's going on with this state data issue.
I'd be happy to. So, the way the data analytics platform works is it draws from a whole host of source systems. Once you set up those, I call them pipes, the pipes running into the data analytics platform. Once you set that up, the platform itself looks at the information that's coming in, and if there are errors that it can identify, it generates an error log and says, here are the problems. Here are the gaps in the data that are showing up. We then have a sophisticated data governance program within the department to go through those and do, we prioritize them and we work through them, trying to eliminate those errors. This is how data systems work. There's no such thing as a perfect data system. But what we have is an incredibly sophisticated method of ensuring our data integrity. However, what we recently discovered is that one of those pipes that was recalibrated when the city went to a new human resources information system. What it did is it broke some of the links to some of the data points in, I mentioned earlier, the IA Pro system, where officers are entering in race data, specifically around use of force. And what happened was there were variables in there that were not mapped into the data analytics platform. And it was receiving that information as not unknown, which is, that is a selected variable, but as not specified, because it didn't know what it was. But because it was receiving it as not specified, the DAP did not recognize that was missing data. It had a value for that. It just was not a helpful value. So when the monitor, the preliminary use of force report, in there was a statistic that 1/3 of our use of force data did not have race data associated with it. And we thought that was really, really quite bizarre, because, and obviously very, very concerning, because for the reasons that I articulated earlier in response to Director Grant's question, we have a thorough, comprehensive review of every use of force. So how could it be that we're missing 1/3 of the data? And the answer is that review happens within IA Pro. So when you look at this in IA Pro, you're seeing all the race data. It's in the data analytics platform, which feeds the public-facing dashboard. That's where the error was. So it took us a while to track this down and pin it down. And we have already done what we call the hot fix to correct that issue. And then we are backtracking to ensure that is not replicated in any other systems along the way. But again, this was very concerning to us. Obviously, we're going to take some rational hits on this, because there was an error in our data that we didn't catch and the monitor identified. But within a 48-hour period, we were able to identify what caused it, how to fix it, and did so, which again shows the sophistication of the data governance program at SPD. So it's unfortunate. It will be fixed in the final report. I'm sure that will raise questions itself. But in terms of our racial and data analytics, what I talked about earlier was the equity program, where we're looking at the frisk data. What we do with that information is we break it into white and non-white for the analysis, because when you get into the granularity of different ethnicities and races, it actually becomes less helpful than that broader demarcation. And this allows us to actually have real statistical power behind these values. So what we had done in that program in our data analysis generally is, if we have unknowns, we default those to non-white. We assume that is a misrepresentation in, I don't know exactly what the right language is, in favor of disparity, I guess would be the way I'd put it. So we have that assumption built into our data analytics. So these not specifieds they don't actually change the way we look at these values as we do our internal assessments of disparities.
Thank you. Douglas, did you have any follow-up?
Not right at this second, but thank you for that information, Brian. Appreciate it.
Tasha Johnson, did you have a question?
I did, but since we've returned to talking about more data analytics, I would like to reserve the rest of our time to talking about those things. It was about the social worker and police officer relationship, and that feels like going way back. So I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. Officer Mullins, did you have a question or something to add? Sorry, Officer. Oh, there we go. There you go.
Yes. My question, and what I have to do is I want to be careful not to step on Mr. Maxey's message, but I'm on the street every day, and the Mac officers with mental health professionals, I don't see it at all, especially in South Precinct. I don't see it. I don't hear it on the radio. I don't see it. My understanding of the reason why we were defunding was part of that funding was supposed to go to the crisis people, so that they could assist us in taking over these calls when we have mental health crisis. I see that our workload has increased and that we are responding to more and more calls of a crisis nature, and that we don't see these crisis professionals at all, let alone matching them with officers. I'm sorry, I've never heard of that. And I'm all for it. I wish they could kind of be infused into our squads so that they could respond to calls with us in a separate car, so that we could arrive together and one another would not have to wait on the other to show up. We could arrive together. That would be fantastic. So as I'm saying, I'm not trying to step on Mr. Maxey's message. I'm just saying that I hope that nobody believes that this problem is solved or that it's getting better. We're going to crisis calls all the time as officers, not by ourselves, with each other, but we're not seeing the crisis people there, the crisis professionals. That's all.
So, Officer Mullins, I don't think you're stepping on my message at all, because I think what I was saying is that we have this program, but it is not nearly scaled to where it should be at all. We have I confirmed this, we have 4 contract mental health therapists, but they don't work full time, and it's subject to availability. So this is certainly not going to be impacting the the majority of crisis calls that officers are dispatched to. This is a discrete resource that is limited in the current environment. And yes, the goal would be to increase this, to scale it, to figure out alternative responses to take the burden off of officers. But it's always been the case that the police are a failed system. And when things don't work, it's the police that have to go. And that is why we have fought very hard to ensure that every officer has the skills they need to deal with crisis events when they encounter them. And to what Reverend Walden was saying earlier, the vast majority, it is incredible the number of crisis. We do 10,000 a year plus And, we all know the ones that have ended badly because they take up
Yes.
most of our time to discuss. And, I would submit that those ones that ended badly, for the most part, there isn't an alternative responder that you're sending to that because they have potential for violence and they're high risk
Right.
calls. And, people just aren't going to go to that. That does not mean you cannot offload a lot of the body of work is defaulting to officers right now if we can come up with viable alternative resources. And that's still being reimagined at this point, and we're working on it. But with the staffing crisis we have, down almost 400 officers, you bet the day-to-day workload on crisis calls has been increasing for our officers. So I think our message is completely aligned, Officer Mullins.
Okay.
Go ahead, Reverend Wall.
I just have two comments, and one is that I've gone through the training just the 8 hours, and I really would encourage commissioners to sign up for the 40 hours. We had one commissioner, Helen, she's no longer with us. She was behavioral health. She went through the 40 hours, and I signed up for the 40 hours, but then training to go through the training, but then COVID came. And so I'd like to invite commissioners to go through that 40-hour training if you can, or at least the 8-hour training, so you'd have a better analysis for yourself when you go through the training. I mean, I think now it's out at the Justice Center now, and as soon as the CIT people and it's a quarterly meeting, and you're welcome to come to the quarterly meeting because I go to the quarterly meeting. And I've been going for the Community Police Commission. So, I mean, I go for mothers and for the CPC from time to time. You'd get a lot more information. You see the modulars that they put together for working with people who have autism. You'd come away not maybe still have the same mindset about it, but at least you have a little bit more exposure about it. And so as soon as we get the word that it's going to be open again, if you can't do the 40 hours, do the 8 hours. Do the 8 hours training so you can go through it. And in the past, we've gone through some of the trainings before. We just have not done that recently. And what I'd like to ask for the police department, I wish they would put together a chart to show all the unintended consequences when people hurriedly to take things away from the police department. There's a lot of unintended consequences that I don't think a lot of us know about. I mean, I might know a lot about some of them, but it's not my discretion. It's not for me to talk about them. But I mean, because this is one, but there's many other unintended consequences that has happened. I mean, and people don't want to talk about it. But I think in order to heal the city and to get and work on this, we have to talk about the unintended consequences that happened back in 2020. When things was moved out, whether it's domestic violence, I mean, all of the things, I mean, and social workers are not paid to take the risk. I mean, tell the truth, they're not paid to take the risk. They're not going to show up when the suspect, or when a person, not a suspect, from a person who's having a illness, a crisis, without a police escort. They're not going to do that and stuff, not right now. So anyway, I just wish the police department would put together a graph, be a chart to be able to show the mayor and the city council all the unintended consequences that has happened in the city. And so I'm done. But please go to the training, because if I'd like to go with a buddy. So who wants to be a buddy with me so we can go to the training as soon as it's open again for the community? I mean, for us to go, and they're going to do live training. I like to have a buddy. So sign up with me so we can go. If you can't do the 40 hours, because that's taking off a whole week, or that's taking off your whole job. But if you can do the 8 hours, sign up with me.
I'll go with Reverend Walden.
Oh, good. I was hoping you would go. Yeah, I was hoping. Let's go.
I'll be your buddy.
Okay, thank you.
Director Grant, I think I saw your hand.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I will also be Reverend Walden's buddy and go to the training. Absolutely.
Does anyone else have anything to add or to ask? Okay. I have just a couple of thoughts off the top of my head. I think one thing that is helpful is to kind of expand the definition of a bad outcome when it comes to a crisis call, because obviously we focus on fatalities, which is completely understandable and logical. But when somebody in a mental health crisis ends up in King County Jail, that's also bad. And when someone in a mental health crisis ends up just getting put right back on the street because there are no services, as Mr. Maxey has noted, that's also a bad outcome. And when somebody who's experiencing mental health problems ends up on trial because they're just on the right side of our legal system's very low bar for competency, that's also a bad outcome. And so I think it's important to not focus exclusively on fatalities, although of course we do need to focus heavily on fatalities. And then the only other thing I would add is that there's certainly something to be said for integrating mental health professionals with the police, but as we've seen in other cities, there's also quite a bit to be said for creating independent mental health units like those in Denver or Austin or other cities that respond to calls without the police. And of course, the kinds of calls they're going to respond to are, there's debate about that, but these are alternatives that are already operational in other cities. And I know every month we talk about a different program, if it's Cahoots in Eugene or if it's STAR in Denver or whatever it is, but there are operational programs that exist that exist to ensure that folks experiencing a mental health crisis receive medical treatment and not law enforcement response. And I think it's very important to remember that that there are options for that.
So just a couple things there, just on how we define out. Just for this group's awareness, internal dashboard where we have performance analytics that we present to supervisors and internally in the department, we promote the referral for service rate. That dashboard actually sees incarceration or arrest and adverse outcomes. Although we sometimes recognize that an arrest and putting someone into jail, there are circumstances where that's the only way to actually get them some form of support and stabilization. It's not ideal, it's not what we want, and we de-emphasize that internally. As far as the Cahoots and the STAR and Albuquerque and Austin and all these different places that these wonderful models out there, they're, first of all, they don't actually tend to reduce the workload on police by very much. They tend to fill an unserved area, which police are not responding to, but is a public safety gap. And that's really, really important. But all of them out potentially by calls. That is sort of the it's usually dispatched before that resource is sent. So even for the violent calls, which again, to the degree we're focusing on fatalities here, those calls probably would not have been diverted to any known resource model. Not, again, absolutely worth pursuing, support them, but I want to be realistic about how much of it they're going to put in current workload that falls to officers at this point in time.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. But at the same time, if that unmet public safety need is being met, there's going to be a downstream effect, and it might take months, it might take years, but there's going to be a downstream effect because right now we're, with high utilizers and everything else, we're not doing anything to make harm less likely in the future. We're just conducting the bare minimum amount of triage that we possibly can to try to prevent the worst possible outcomes from happening. We're not reducing the likelihood, we're not significantly reducing the likelihood of harm in the future. And we're seeing that from these high utilizers who keep cycling through the system with dozens and in one case hundreds of police contacts, to the point where that becomes a public safety issue. Officer Mo.
I would love for your idea that's happening in other cities to be here. That would mean less contact for us and less problems for us. I understand what you're saying. What happened to the money and why don't we have those programs? If my
I agree.
officers are struggling, if they're afraid of getting laid off and going to other agencies, if other agencies are taking them because of lack of funding or whatever reason why officers are leaving, then why don't we see the results of that money that left us so that we can have this crisis taken care of?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's absolutely true, Officer Mullins. I think that's very well put. And I think that what we have seen is city government, and I'm not putting this on either the mayor or the city council because it's a kind of whole of government strategy, but I think we've seen a lack of urgency from a lot of different forms of city leadership about exactly that kind of stuff. And I totally agree with you on that. Reverend Walden, I'm sorry, I might have interrupted you. Okay, all right. Does anyone else have anything to add? I don't want to just snag the last word for myself.
I was just going to say, Austin, kind of to Officer Mullins' point, and I think this is where I've been stretched personally and challenged to grow is, we're trying, I think the conversations around like defunding, divesting, reinvesting in community, those are all leading to these big questions around we're trying to create something that has never existed before. And that's going to take a really long time, maybe even, I hope not beyond my time on Earth, but it's going to take a long time, I think, to build that infrastructure to create something different. And I have been challenged and stretched in that way, knowing that, that harm is still going to continue to happen, whether we have, policing or alternatives or whatever. And I think that the way that I try to think about is like, how do we mitigate that? Again, trying to decenter myself in conversations where, I have a lot of privilege in the way that I move about the world as a non-Black, non-Indigenous person of color. And I don't know, just really trying to challenge myself to learn about what do those alternatives look like? Where are my areas that I need to stretch and grow? So I'm not, having been someone, again, I've been open about this, having been someone that wanted to be a police officer, thinking like, I could do a lot of good. And again, like I have a lot of love for Mark because I think that Mark is a good man in general, much less a good officer that I think is also a part of, a system that's broken and flawed, but I have so much respect for him and hope that he would be someone that would show up for me. If I was in a time of crisis, and also just want to be vulnerable in the space I'm in around trying to challenge myself and stretch. So I think that those alternative programs are trying to create something that's going to take a long time to create. And I think that maybe where the rub is for people is that harm is still happening because we're so used to being dependent on one form of public safety that isn't always holistic, right? It's not always caring for people and all of their needs. It might be an officer showing up to a violent situation for someone that is having maybe a mental health crisis, but then that person who's having a mental health crisis isn't getting the resources they need. So that's what I mean by holistic public safety. So just wanted to like add that as like a, these alternatives that we're talking about are going to take a long time because we're creating something that hasn't, or trying to create something before institutionally. Yes, this kind of care has existed in BIPOC communities and other communities for a long time, but institutionally, we're trying to create something that's going to take a while. So just wanted to add that thought.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything else to add before we move to public comment? Okay. I'll go ahead and kick this off, and then I'm going to have to take off a little early. So public comment is welcomed by the CPC, and individual speakers will be provided up to 2 minutes to comment about items on the agenda.
We want to thank our speaker. We want to thank, Brian Maxey for being here.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. I thought we were still going to do department updates. That's the only reason, and he was going to still be here. That was my.
No. That's fine. I define. That's fine. Okay.
I'm sorry. If you were leaving the meeting, then yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay.
But thank you, Reverend Walden. I apologize. Yes, so we welcome public comment, and each speaker will be provided 2 minutes. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment today?
Hi, this is Jacqueline Wu, Communications Advisor for the CPC. At this time, there's no emails that have come in through the OCPC inbox. If anyone is interested in registering in the meeting, please feel free to register by voice or to use the raise the hand function as well.
Okay, well, I have to run. I'll go ahead and hand the meeting off to Douglas, and thank all of you for your comments. This was a very helpful discussion for me personally, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for facilitating.
Thanks, Austin.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for facilitating. Have a great class.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, we'll now move into department updates. Is there someone here from the City Council's office? Newell, hello. Good morning.
Thank you, Douglas. Yes, the updates are on the meeting next week of the Public Safety and Human Services Committee. A couple police-related items. The first is a quarterly update on staffing. The second is first discussion about hiring incentives. The April 26th meeting will be discussion. Potential vote would be at the second meeting, which is scheduled for May 10th. Thank you.
Thank you, Newell. Great. Any update from anyone in the mayor's office? Not seeing anyone from the mayor's office on the call. I know we've put out an invitation to Mayor Harrell, and he's agreed to come to a future meeting. I don't think we have a date on the calendar yet, but I know we also heard from Senior Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell at our last meeting. Ron, good morning. Do you have any updates from the monitoring team?
Good morning. Other than to state that the monitor continues to work towards finalization of the use of force assessment with a projected filing date of April 29th. No, I do not. I do have an inquiry. It is my understanding from earlier in the meeting that the CPC plans to attempt to schedule another community engagement meeting with the participation of the monitor and SPD. At this juncture, do you have any approximation with regard to the timing of that meeting so that I can give him some idea?
I don't know if Brandy has any additional thoughts, but I think what seems likely is, we will coordinate with you offline and try to find a time that works for you folks, if there is one that works for you folks. But yeah, I think it's an idea that's recently come up, so I don't know if we have like a specific date on the calendar. Alina?
Yeah, just on that note for the community engagement meeting, if we're involving SPD, I don't remember when, but we had a community engagement meeting with members of the SPD and community. We had I think it was a panel discussion. We had members from, I think maybe King County Equity Now, just some community partners, I can't remember. But anyway, I think that there was obviously some disrespectful things that happened in that meeting between SPD and the panelists. And I think moving forward, if we do that, this is not something we have to do right now, but before that, we should have some conversation around community agreements and expectations that we have, and have some kind of centering around like power dynamics, racial dynamics, because I think that there was some harm that was caused to some community folks in that, to some of the panelists when we had that. So I think maybe setting up some community expectations and agreements and asking people to consent to that, and having a facilitator that is willing to hold people accountable to that would be really important moving forward.
I think that's a great idea, Lena. Brandy.
I just wanted to add it. Yes, thank you, Alina, for bringing that up. And that was quite some time ago, but definitely the wave of that is still felt sometimes. But since we've had Felicia Cross here, our amazing community engagement director, she has held and facilitated some really great meetings that has put a lot of what you're talking about as being mindful of in the forefront, and has been doing that since last year. So I don't foresee that being a problem in the future, or and it hasn't been in quite some time. But thank you for raising that, though.
Sorry, I was just going to acknowledge, Ron, that I was one of the facilitators in that space with Joseph. So I will acknowledge that I didn't do a good job of like stepping up, not in a protective way, but just holding people accountable to some comments that were made. So this was before Felicia, I think, was even part of our staff. So excited to have Felicia there and to facilitate and support that. Sorry, Ron, go ahead.
No problem. I'll always subordinate myself to your comments, Lena. Thank you. I will give the monitor a heads up, so to speak, with regard to another community engagement meeting on this particular topic. We're always happy to collaborate with the CPC in that regard. I want to second the comments of Executive Director Grant. I think that Community Engagement Director Felicia Cross has done a really fine job. I believe the monitor believes that she has done a really fine job. She has a gift at facilitating, and I think it benefits the community, the CPC, and all of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. Brandy, is that a new hand or old hand?
I was just basically going to say that I will follow up with the monitor and point folks at SPD around what folks' availability will be, so we can try to get that special meeting on the books.
Excellent, thank you. Anyone here from the DOJ to provide an update?
Yeah, hey, good morning, Douglas and everyone. No update from the department, so thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Office of Police Accountability, do we have anyone from OPA here to provide an update?
Morning. Yes.
Morning.
Not a big update, but we have a few civilian positions that we had given job offers, and there's just a delay in SPD backgrounding. And so I think it's going to take a month or two longer than expected to get a couple people onboarded. And then we expect a couple new civilian positions in the coming months as well. So definitely trying to figure out a solution to get these people started sooner.
Thank you, Lauren. With the fact that you folks are down a director and you're kind of down capacity, you're hiring for positions, are you kind of expecting, as might be expected, kind of delays in any investigations, or is there any kind of
Not
major
at the
delays
moment. Complaints are
Yeah.
down right now, year over year. So we're on track with all of our investigations. I haven't heard any recent updates about the director hiring aside from end of June, I think is when City Council had intended to have a new appointment. So just waiting for that, but everything's still going as planned.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. All right. Anyone here from OIG, Office of Inspector General, to provide an update? I see Miroslava. Yeah. Hey, good morning.
Yeah, and Inspector General is also here today.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I'm just going to take it from here. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Here I am. Hi, I didn't join as a panelist earlier, so sorry about the hiccup. Good morning, commissioners, Director Grant, everybody. Got a couple things to talk about that work that we rolled out. We sent a copy of this to the co-chairs and the director last week, but we did a memo about SPD failure to wear masks during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was an investigation that we did as a result of a community complaint. So that's out there. We're getting ready to push out the kind of academic part of the crowd psychology work we've been doing with a report that was done by Professor Stott. So that should be coming out very, very soon, perhaps even hopefully this week. We're wrapping up discussions on Wave 3 events in Sentinel Net Review and hope to get that report out in fairly short order. And then our annual report, we are looking to produce in May. So that's about all I have in terms of updates. We have a lot of new staff. So like OPA, we're running into some delays with backgrounding, but we'll be looking to introduce those folks to you all very soon. Thanks.
Sounds like there's a lot going on, Inspector General Judge. Thank you so much for the update. And thank you for sharing the report on masking.
Thanks, Douglas.
I don't think we heard plenty from SPD today, and I do want to thank again Brian Maxey for being here and for taking so much time to answer our questions. It's really appreciated. So we'll move into CPC updates. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. And let's see, scrolling through. So we'll start with co-chair updates. The first one is, as you all have noticed, we've been rotating who facilitates our bi-monthly CPC meetings, which has been really both appreciated on the one hand. Being for myself, I really appreciated the help of folks coming in and hearing different voices and perspectives. And two, it's been a great way for us to hear from different folks on the CPC and provide folks an opportunity to step up and get to know the work a little bit more intimately and, you know, take a crack at facilitating these meetings. And so I wanted to just extend the opportunity to all of our commissioners. If you're interested in facilitating our meetings, we would love your help. I think it's been a nice kind of change that we initially did because of kind of capacity constraints, but have since, I think, come to just really appreciate as a practice for hearing from different people and giving all of our commissioners a chance to kind of step up and shine. And so if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to Reverend Walden, myself, Brandy. We may be reaching out directly to you as well to ask for your help in facilitation. It's a pretty simple thing, and we can help you get comfortable doing it. And we would certainly appreciate hearing your voice.
Yes, and I'd like to chime in and just say, you know, I mean, I've been thinking about this. I was thinking about Elena and how that would go for, you know, to co-chair one of the meetings, and also Joseph. I mean, and so yeah, just to try it, and you're not going to be by yourself. We're going to be there with you, and it really it gets to, you know, you get to see you know, different faces, and everybody has the capacity. I mean, so everybody has the capacity to do this, and so nobody's born a leader. So this is all on the job training. We all learn as we take the training wheels off. So that, you know, so hey, we're just taking the training wheels off. So we be calling on you, okay? And I expect a yes when I call. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Reverend Walton. Appreciate that. Yes, it is definitely a good idea to take Reverend Walden's call and to say yes, and I hope you do. The next update I wanted to share is that, as folks know, Reverend Walden and I have been serving as co-chairs since January, the January CPC election, which ended up getting postponed. And we are recommending that we move to a end of June CPC co-chair election, so in the next few months. And so, you know, speaking for myself, I'm going to be taking a 3-month sabbatical or leave of absence, whatever's the right term, after June from the CPC with the intention of returning. I graduate from grad school at the beginning of June, and I'm looking forward to just a chance to kind of recalibrate my life after that. It's been a really crazy 3 years in this program. And so wanted to give you all that notice. You can start thinking about, stepping up for the co-chair position and helping out, lead the CPC in this way. I will say, you're in really, really great hands with the staff and with Brandy, and, it's more doable than you might think. And so, but we've been in this kind of holding pattern for 6 or so months now, where Reverend Walden and I have been holding over as co-chairs. And, by putting a date on the calendar with quite a bit of notice, our hope is that we can give folks time to kind of plan and think about your opportunity to step up and run for co-chair. And if you have questions, if you're on the fence but are interested but are not sure, whether it can work for you, please reach out to Reverend Walden, myself, Brandy. We'd be very, very happy to talk with you. And I also think that by June, we'll hopefully have some new commissioners approved by City Council joining our ranks, and we can see if they're interested in stepping up for leadership. But I did want to just flag that for everyone and put that on folks' calendars and in your minds so that there's plenty of notice. Any questions about that? Great. Okay, well, we will move on to Executive Director updates.
Thank you, Douglas. Thank you, Reverend Walden. Just kind of wanted to add a little bit more to what Douglas was just saying. I know there are many natural leaders and already leaders within the commission. Please do not hesitate to reach out and take Douglas up on that offer, but definitely reach out to me, have a conversation, ask me any questions about what the commitment looks like, the direction that we're going in, anything that would make you apprehensive or even possibly anxious about taking on the responsibility. As they have said, they've done such a tremendous job, but I think a lot of it is more of sometimes people feeling like there's more to it than what it is. Like Douglas said, there is a dynamic team that's behind you, that's supporting you. And so it would not be a difficult feat at all. And so I welcome any of you to be a part of leadership and help oversee this work that we're doing. I feel like all of you would be capable of participating in some of those co-chair slots. Also to add, as Douglas was saying, there have been recommendations for 2 new commissioners, council and the mayor. So we have potentially 2 new commissioners that will be starting, hopefully during the next appointment process. There'll be more information about that to come. Also wanted everyone to know that we're still working on the annual report. Another update is we have already started just kind of behind the scenes, preemptively working on preparing for and laying the foundation for a special meeting. Again, the intentionality of having those core session, community engagement sessions was to make sure that we were able to close the loop with community and be able to allow an opportunity for folks to have all their questions and concerns answered and responded to. And so we were contemplative that we were going to be doing this. I will get with Ron, Mr. Ward, and I will check in again with SPD around what their availability will be. I would love all commissioners to attend and be able to participate in that meeting as well. And finally, my other update is actually 2 more things. The OPA director search has been delayed by a week. We also, which does not impact the time frame for the OPA director search, but I wanted you all to know that commissioner-wise, who will be representing us in that search committee will be Douglas and Austin. And our hope is that Reverend Hunter will also provide support to them in that process. And so that is who will be representing the commission in the OPA director search. And then finally, the micro policing report for 2021 is completed, and Dr. Helfgott is asking again, extended an invitation to commissioners via myself and Felicia to see about commissioners and community participating in the upcoming dialogue series that she has hosted and done annually. So we will send around information to those of you that may be interested in participating in that. And other than that, those are all the updates I have, unless anyone has any questions for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to new business, a couple ideas were raised over the weekend, I believe, by Austin, and I wanted to see if we could funnel them into our committees to work on and then bring back recommendations that we could vote on as a full commission. And so the two I want to flag, and the first one is really relevant to the conversation we had earlier today, is creating non-police or hybrid police social work approach for mental health first response, similar to Health One and STAR, Cahoots, these other programs that we're aware of. And so I think this would be a really good fit. It's for the behavioral health work group. It's certainly something that that group has discussed before, but I think it would be interesting, kind of per Austin's idea, to come up with a recommendation that's more of a position that the CPC could support and vote on. And so, Nia, I know you're on the call, at least you were.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. I'm just, my eyes are moving slowly. So Nia, I don't know if that sounds like a good fit for you, for as something that the behavioral health work group could consider and work on.
It actually does. It's so funny because as we were having the conversation, and I think Austin kind of posed the question with Brian Maxey, I wrote it down, and I was actually planning for us to have a discussion in our next behavioral health work group meeting about this. So I do think it's a perfect fit.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And then the second one, Nia, I know you work so much with the work groups. I wonder if you have thoughts on this. Maybe it's police practices, or maybe there's an ad hoc committee, but the second idea is to expand CPC's kind of legal authority to request or demand, documents. Yeah, I don't know if you or anyone else has thoughts on kind of what work group might make the most sense there, or whether we would need to create something ad hoc.
So my initial thought is, based on some of the conversations we were having in the state legislative agenda work group, we were talking about potentially pivoting in like the off season for state legislature to advocating at the city level. So this may be something that we could pick up as, because to petition to expand our powers, we probably have to go to city council. So there may be a place in what we've been calling a state legislative agenda for this to be picked up, is my initial thought. But if others have other thoughts, I'd like to hear those.
I think that's perfect. I'm really glad I asked you, because that makes perfect sense to me based on the stuff that work group has talked about. So that sounds perfect. If we could add that to the state legislative agenda for their next meeting.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Nia. And maybe if you could stay on the line as we move through work group updates now. So the first one's police practices. I know we've been kind of working to get a time on the calendar that works for everyone. Is there any updates from police practices beyond the upcoming meeting?
No, I know that we were going to meet with behavioral health work group, and because of family issues that I was dealing with, was unable to do that. And so still looking for another date where the two groups can meet, and then we'll have a report. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Hunter. And if anyone who's a part of police practices or behavioral health, if you haven't already responded with your availability to find a time for that meeting, if you could please do that. Thank you. We heard, a fair amount about the most recent community engagement meeting, but Felicia, is there anything else you want to report out on, or anyone else from community engagement?
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you for all this, everyone who's helped to make the last 4 meetings successful. Thank you, Ron and Reverend Walden, and for all of your support. Let's see, I just wanted to talk, make sure to remind everybody that we need, if you have any topics, anything that you want brought to the community engagement meetings, to please send me an email, let me know. I'm working on, for the next meeting, potentially working on someone to talk about contracts, since that was one of the big topics. If you have any suggestions or thoughts about that, let me know. And also, what else? There was one more thing. Oh, and more to come. We're just formulating some of the future meetings. So I do encourage, once again, all the commissioners to please try to attend. We did have a crisis intervention presentation at one of the meetings, and so there are some things to gain from attending, and I would love to see you guys all there. And Elena, I'll talk to you offline about my facilitation. Okay, thank you.
Shailene?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Shailene here. I just wanted to take time to have, and we don't always do it for staff, especially those working behind the scenes. Mostly like Emily, started on the policy team, and Jacqueline, who's new. But I just really want to thank them as well, along with Felicia, with stepping up, especially the last 2 community engagement meetings. It was an all hands on deck effort. And I just really appreciate the teamwork and collaboration. And we don't always talk about everyone on staff every time, but I just want to take a moment to just say it publicly and just say it for everyone, especially, working in the evenings, working all day. It's really helpful. So big shout out to the team for that.
Thank you for sharing that appreciation, Shailene. That's great. Thank you so much for doing that. We really appreciate our staff and how hard they work. State legislative agenda.
My hand is up, Douglas, so maybe you just can't see it. It was evident that it was all hands on deck at the community engagement meeting. So thank all the staff for being present and making your voices known when it was needed. And I also wanted to thank the staff for putting the recording and the chat, making it very easily accessible to us by having it on the agenda for those of us who were unable to make the meeting. So I really appreciate the extra effort and making it really easy for the commissioners to watch the Zoom meeting as well as read the comments. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, and even the work that happened afterward. I mean, the work to bring forward the collect the questions and bring forward the questions from community, which has then informed a variety of other kind of documents and statements that the CPC's put together. So yeah, we really appreciate it. State legislative agenda, any updates?
We are still working to determine what our new meeting schedule will be in the off season, but looking forward to having the opportunity to look at how we can interact with legislators at the local levels.
Great. Complaint and appeals.
We have our next work group meeting next Thursday. We are still working through putting together a plan, but I think we're getting closer to bringing something forward to the commission for you all to vote on how this work group will move forward.
Nice. Great. that brings us towards the close of our meeting. Is there anything that we didn't cover that folks want to bring up? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate your input and involvement, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Recording.